At first I thought, well, I'm failing her with my breastfeeding. Like there's something wrong with me. And so that was really hard. The other thing that worried me was no one realized that she was jaundiced. And I thought, well, in some way I should have known that.
Balloons, bazookas, boobies, bosoms, boulders, cans, hooters, knockers, melons, honkers, jugs, rack, tatas, tits, torpedoes, guns, bust, doorknobs, coconuts, and our favorite one, the girls. Welcome to the All About Breastfeeding show, where your host, Lori, highlights mothers just like yourself and goes beyond the surface questions and digs deep so they share not only their joys and happiness in their daily breastfeeding life, but also their pain and struggles and how they worked through them.
Welcome to the show today. I am your host, Lori Jill Eisenstadt, IBCLC, and I want to thank you so much for spending your time with me today. Shortly after I started the show, and as a result of my daily practice meeting with moms, I have really learned that there's quite a number of moms out there who are looking forward to breastfeeding and who are breastfeeding. And what I realize based on the feedback they're giving me is that there's a lack of information and support before you have your baby and after you have your baby. Some people live in places where it's hard to get the support that they need. Some people are living very busy lifestyles where they're unable to attend a group at a time and date, specifically where it's meeting, and or perhaps your partner cannot come the same day that you can. So there's a little missing piece, or I should say a big missing piece for some moms, especially after you have your baby, where you realize there's more to know about this whole breastfeeding thing, and it sure would have been nice to know some things before the baby's born. And it also would be really nice to have support after my baby's born. So there are two places on my website that I would love to direct your attention to because it has information on how you can join and register for groups that will help fill this void. If you missed out on the last Breastfeeding Mothers group, we have one beginning July 6th. We meet once a week for 8 weeks, and it ends August 24th. Being a member of this group, it means that you are not alone postpartum. You are with a dedicated group of mothers who are all adjusting to life as a new mommy and adjusting to the world of breastfeeding. You have your very own special place, a virtual online New Mommies Breastfeeding Mothers Group. And here you can laugh, talk, vent, cry, share struggles, and the joys of newborn mothering. If you'd like to join us, all you need to do is go to allaboutbreastfeeding.biz/support. And if you feel like you need help before the baby's born and questions you'd like to have answered, then allaboutbreastfeeding.biz/Skype is a place to go to find out more detailed information about Skype consults that were designed with you in mind. Prenatal Skype consults is my answer to the multiple times a week I hear moms saying, "I wish I would have known this information before my baby was born." There's no need anymore to feel like you missed out on some crucial information or that you didn't have a place to ask your important questions and sometimes private questions. Moms who have a prenatal consult say it's one of the best ways to spend their time and money before your baby's born. Now, I know many of you are probably doing something right now that makes it difficult to write down the information I'm sharing. Of course, you could always go and listen to the show and jot down the information. But if you don't have time to do that or don't remember or you're too busy, this is really all you need to remember. Allaboutbreastfeeding.biz. Go to the page and you'll find links to the other pages that you are looking for. I had such a fabulous conversation with today's guest, and we had so much to talk about that, no surprise to me or anyone else, we went way over our time. So I've done the next best thing when that happens. I just make it into a 2-part show. In today's show, part 1, you will hear us talk about her background, what her interests were as a young girl, her parenting lifestyle, as well as her breastfeeding journey with her daughter, who is now 5 years old. Make sure you come back and listen to part 2, which will be released next week, where my guest talks about the work she is currently doing. She is an aromatherapist, and she had such great information to share about the use of essential oils with pregnant and the breastfeeding mom, as well as the safety and use of essential oils for newborns and our children. This is another one of those shows that are just chock filled with information that you'll definitely want to share it with your friends who have an interest in essential oils. The more we learn, the better we can take care of ourselves and our families. I can't wait for you to meet today's guest. Let's get started. I would like to welcome to today's show Sharon E. Becker, PH candidate. She's a certified aromatherapist and a professional member of Alliance of International Aromatherapists and National Association of Holistic Aromatherapists. She is a scientist who is finishing her PhD in cell biology. While finishing her PhD, she's also learned that relaxation exercises, physical exercise, and essential oils form a great complement to traditional treatments. She decided to further her study of essential oils and became a certified aromatherapist with AromaHead Institute, which is one of the only nationally and internationally recognized aromatherapy schools. What makes her distinct from other essential oil enthusiasts and salespeople is that her PhD in scientific training allows her to understand the chemical aspects of aromatherapy. Her extensive bench work in the lab means that you can trust the blends she makes, and they're mixed in proper dilutions and are therapeutic strength. Her mission is to combine her scientific training with clinical aromatherapy training in order to help others. And when I first met Shannon online, I was really intrigued, and I know she has a background in aromatherapy, and I really wanted to hear from her perspective in layman's terms the differences in some of the essential oils, in some of the companies, and also I have a huge interest in learning about the safety of essential oils. They've become so mainstream, and yet I've also learned that some of the essential oils for some populations in some dilutions are not safe. And so I really wanted to learn a lot about this. And of course, we're working a lot with mothers and newborns and babies and children. So when we talk about essential oils, we're going to be talking a lot about pregnant moms, breastfeeding moms, their newborns, and their children. And I'm looking forward to her helping me really understand the essential oils better and their safety and their use. So I would love to welcome Shannon to the show today.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
You are very welcome. I'm so glad we have this opportunity to hang out together and for all of our breastfeeding listeners to get to know you, Shannon.
Thank you.
I would love for you to start off by telling us a little bit of background about what life was like for you in the family that you grew up in.
Sure. I am product of a very crunchy family. I grew up in Chicago. My parents were kind of early on the home birth and attachment parenting like spectrum. I was breastfed for a very long time. I was carried around in baby wearing carriers. My parents did a family bed for a very long time. So that was sort of my normal. And so when I grew up and decided to have kids, I have a daughter who is now 5. So I looked at a lot of my parenting practices as sort of normal. And I was a little surprised to hear about other practices because I just, you grow up and your normal is your normal. So I carried on the traditions of baby carrying. I actually was a volunteer for one of the largest baby wearing associations. It's called Baby Wearing International. I was dedicated to breastfeeding for as long as possible because I understood that that was the best way to help her immune system, really great bonding time. And I just really understood kind of innately that that was something that you should do. And we actually had a few hiccups early on. My daughter had a tongue tie. She actually had 2 frenulectomies. We had to do syringe feeding at the beginning, but we actually were able to breastfeed through to right after her 2nd birthday, when I needed to start taking some medication that was not compatible with breastfeeding. But even so, we still do a lot of cuddling, and I'd say we still have a really similar relationship with each other, where she still does some of the common things that breastfed kids do, of being really comfortable with my chest. So it's really nice to do that kind of snuggling.
I'm curious to know, you talk about growing up in a crunchy family.
Yeah.
And it's funny because there are names for it: attachment parenting,
right,
and co-sleeping and baby wearing. And when my kids were little, I slept with them. I kept them close to me. Mm-hmm. And I didn't have names for them. Like, I wasn't saying that I was doing attachment parenting.
Right.
I wasn't saying that I was doing co-sleeping. Mm-hmm. So now there are terms for it. And I'm wondering if you knew that, if those terms were used when you were younger, or if it's just something your family did.
It's a good question. I wasn't aware of those terms either until I was pregnant. Retroactively talking to my parents said, well, that's just what everyone did. Everyone did breastfeeding for a long time. Everyone did bed sharing. Everyone did all of these things. But when I talk to my peers, they don't always have the same background that I do. They may have been, kept in a crib in a different room, or different parenting methods that were a little less. Again, I'm using the word attachment parenting, but for me, a lot of the perspective that I have about the way that I parented is I treat my daughter like a person who has feelings, and I talk to her logically. There's not a lot of because I said so. And I think that really started even when she was a baby, of, paying attention to her body language. And I think for nursing mothers, when you learn to pay attention to body language with your baby, it just makes everything else easier. And so I think for my parents, that was just something that they did because they felt it was the normal thing to do. They didn't have names really for them to say that's what everyone was doing. I do acknowledge that they probably were traveling in a pretty, I hate to use the term hippie because it's not the same thing, but, in the late 70s, early 80s in a big city, they lived in a neighborhood that was very liberal and very progressive. So I think for them, they did feel like everyone was doing what they were doing.
That was actually fortunate for them, because I was frequently the oddball out, and boy. I had to search for groups. Mm-hmm. So I had little pocket groups. I had my co-op group. I had my home birth
totally
group.
Co-ops. Yeah.
all that kind of stuff, because it wasn't really in the neighborhood. And sometimes I don't even know how I got the ideas that I had about parenting, mothering, but because my kids didn't grow up hearing those terms either.
Right.
But they hear that now mm-hmm. with their peers. My kids will say to me, oh, they're baby wearing. Oh, they're attachment mm-hmm. parenting, about their peers. I'm also curious to know if you know. So when we talk about sleeping, co-sleeping, do you have any idea how long you were sleeping in bed with your parents?
I actually don't, and I don't have memory of it either. And I don't remember my mom breastfeeding. And, on one hand I thought, well, that's strange. But really, if it's sort of the background normal thing, I guess people won't have a memory of it. Looking back, I think that I was still sleeping in my parents' bed at least until my sister was born, so at least until I was 3. And then after that, I think we kind of did family bed at least for maybe a year or 2. So, it wasn't just infancy. And like you said, my parents just felt like it was practical, and I also felt that way. With someone who's nursing, and my daughter nursed around the clock, waking up every 2 hours or 3 hours to nurse and then change a diaper, it just really, I can't imagine having to go to a different room and pick her up or listen for crying or anything like that. And so it was just a lot less stressful for me, and I imagine my parents felt the same way.
Okay, so I'd like to explore a little bit about, again, the family that you grew up in. So it's kind of a crunchy family. Mm-hmm. Your parents doing this cool stuff, and how much did that influence you about what you're doing now as an adult in your career? Were you thinking as a little girl that you were going to be doing something else when you grew up? or is it exactly what you are doing now?
Well, it's funny because my parents, they raised me the way that I'm raising my daughter, of answering lots of questions. Apparently when I was a little kid, I asked a question every few minutes, and my daughter's the same way. So they would have to give me a good answer. Otherwise, I would follow it up with, that doesn't make sense or something like that. So there was a lot of logical thinking when I was little. And my parents are, very smart and logical. My dad started out as a math major in college and went into computers. My mom is teaching computer science now, and my dad is still in the computer business. So there was a lot of analytical thinking, I guess. I actually don't have any memory of saying to my parents, I want to be a princess when I grow up, or I'll be a veterinarian. Instead, I kind of had interests. I liked doing certain things. I liked art, but I also really liked doing math. I really excelled in math in school and also sciences. And so when I was in high school, I was in the International Baccalaureate program. And I kind of had an epiphany my freshman year that I really enjoyed biology. And I think the thing that appeals to me with biology is that there's a lot of understanding the world around you. And there's, a lot of observing. And for me, of course I can be a dreamer, but I'm just so much more of a logical, analytical mind than, I guess, like the way that a poet might think. So I decided that when I went to college, I'd be in the biology program, which is what I did. And I kind of, like undergrads do, they kind of get towards graduation. They're not sure what they'll do when they grow up. So I spent some time after being an undergrad, after I earned my bachelor's, working in different labs. And then I realized that doing research is really for me. So I switched over to the vet school research lab that I'm in now, and actually was working there as an employee for a long time. And then I transitioned to a grad student. I guess growing up, it kind of molded the way I think, but I think innately I think that my brain worked that way anyway. So probably I would wind up in a similar position that I'm in now.
So it's not surprising that you're in the field that you're in.
I don't think so. My parents joke, they call me Dr. Science. I think even as a little kid, it was important to me that people thought that I was smart and things like that. And so I really do think that I would wind up in some sort of position in the sciences, and really more of practical science versus like a physics standpoint where there's a little more theory. So yeah.
You definitely have to have the mind for that. I wouldn't say I'm an artistic, creative person, but I'm definitely not mathematical and analytical either.
Yeah, and I think, a lot of scientists really enjoy art stuff also, but they kind of prioritize their time to do more, I guess, analytical things, even in their free time.
I would like to talk a little bit about breastfeeding with your daughter, and
Sure.
you mentioned it a little bit about that your daughter was tongue-tied. What I'd like to do is go back to before you had her, and I hear what you're saying, that you're growing up in a household and it was just part of what I think like the fabric of everyday life for you. But sometimes we go out into the world and we kind of lose some stuff that we grew up with, and we lose it and then we come back. So I'm wondering that when you were preparing for birth and breastfeeding, did you do anything to prepare for it in a way that you felt like you needed to take a course, so you took a class, or you read books, or you went to La Leche League meetings? Is there anything specific that you did to prepare for it? Or were you really just of the mindset that this is what I'm going to do, and I don't necessarily think I need to see other people doing it, I don't need to learn about it, I don't need to figure out how to do it, it's just what I'm going to do?
Well, I always had feelings. My mom had 2 home births and 1 birth center birth. Whenever I am approaching a new situation, I do like to do a lot of research just to kind of quell any anxiety that I have. So when I was pregnant, I was doing a lot of research about the different OBs around me, the birth center that I eventually used. And at the time, there weren't really many home birth midwives. Unfortunately, in North Carolina, there aren't a lot of home birth midwives. So that was kind of the same situation for my mom when she moved here. So one of the things I was investigating was the typical C-section rates, inducement rates, those sorts of things, because I knew I did not want to be in that position. And I also was reading about the chance of having a C-section goes up when you have an induction, basic things like that.
I'm sitting here laughing because you must in your mind, you must have driven yourself in, like, on one hand you say it helps to quell your anxiety,
right.
And to me that would just drive me insane.
It's really funny because I'm a scientist, I've been trained, and I think I always thought this way of everything is wrong unless you prove it right. And I always have this worry that I communicate something and then later on I discover that I wasn't 100% right. So I think that really stems from the way that I think, but also from my training. So, in a graduate level position, you have a committee and they constantly are asking you to prove yourself. When I gather information, it's, on one hand, it might drive me a little bit crazy, but sort of the net result is for me to feel confident in my choice. So I wound up going with a birth center, and then I was second guessing, well, maybe I should do a home birth. And I knew for sure I didn't want to do a hospital birth.
When you were looking at the statistics
Mm-hmm.
for cesarean sections, were you looking for the individual hospitals that you were thinking about birthing at? Were you looking at the statistics in the United States?
I was looking at the specific hospitals, but more importantly at the different OB offices. At least in my area of North Carolina, until recently, were not a lot of midwives. There were midwives at the birth center, and I think there were 2 midwives that did home birth. Otherwise, all of the birth-related practices were OB-based.
I was wondering how deeply you, in your pregnant state,
Mm-hmm.
were looking at the various statistics in deciding where it is you wanted to have your baby.
So looking at the birth center, they had the lowest transfer to a hospital rate, which made me feel really comfortable. I imagine, and it's not really an easy way to get the statistics on this, but for home birth midwives, I imagine the transfers would be even lower. And I think these numbers are going to be a little biased because they are selecting for more normal births than what OBs see. OBs are going to see a lot of twin births. They're going to see people who need to have a planned cesarean for whatever reason, and those people are not going to be allowed to do home birth or birth center birth.
So you're keeping all that in mind as
Right.
you're making the decision.
Right.
So then you decide to go to a birth center,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yes.
And at the birth center, is that where you took childbirth classes and perhaps breastfeeding classes?
So I decided I was going to use a doula. That worked out fairly well. She also did pregnancy and birthing courses. So
for those who may not know what a doula is,
yeah.
Can you explain that to us?
Sure. So there's a huge range in who doulas are. I've started hearing about, so doulas are usually laymen helpers, but they do sometimes go through a certification of the DONA organization. Doulas are helpers for usually births, but I've started to see abortion doulas and postpartum doulas. Basically, they're there to support the mother and or the family.
So you were using a doula for the birth. You
That's
were hiring
right.
a birth
Yeah.
doula. Okay.
Yeah, and so my birth doula had a lot of experience in teaching birthing classes and also being a birth doula. And sort of as a bonus, she was able to do a lot of really nice photography. So that was just, an extra for us. And so she really had a history in helping with natural births, and that was what I wanted. It was really nice for us to not only have her educate us about labor and delivery, but also, as a familiar face who I knew really well, and she went through teaching me about birth, present at my birth.
Great.
Yeah.
She was there for your birth at the birth center, right?
My doula was there, my husband was there, and my mother and sister were there. And so for me, I feel like birth is sort of, circle of life, I guess. And so I really felt like my birth was putting me into kind of a sisterhood. And I just really felt like my mom was here 30 years ago in this position giving birth to me, and now I'm giving birth to my daughter. And it just really felt great to have my mom there. And my sister was there because she was really interested in starting a family. And I thought this would be great. She'd be an extra support and she'd be present. She was the youngest child and she was the birth center birth.
Cool.
Yeah.
Taking a little break so I can share this info with you. I am really psyched to be able to share this next piece of news with you. My regular listeners are very familiar at this point with Momentum, the organization that I talk about on each show. You know, the one that I say saved my life as a new mother, the organization that helped me find other mothers who were new at this whole mothering thing. They became my people. They helped me navigate that first year of motherhood and continued to mother me as I had more kids, and my need for support through their toddler years and kindergarten years and elementary school years just kept being needed. I made lifelong friends, and they were so helpful that I am doing all I can to continue to support the organization. I want Momentum to continue to thrive, and I want you, my All About Breastfeeding audience, to experience just some of what Momentum is all about. The ladies of Momentum have agreed to give my listeners a 14-day trial membership so you can see what this Mother Center thing is all about at no cost to you. Just hop on over to allaboutbreastfeeding.biz/podcast. You will see a link from Momentum. It's in blue, and you just click it on and it will bring you to the page for you to sign up for your free trial. Honestly and truly, there's absolutely no cost to you. This is just a great opportunity for you to enjoy the discussion groups and the blogs and webinars and educational pieces that are available for free for you. I will have a link to this in the show notes. And now, back to the show. So when you were at the birth center after the birth, did you stay for approximate 12 to 24 hours?
I did not. So at the birth center that is in Chapel Hill in North Carolina, they usually have people stay for at least 6 hours because they want to make sure that there's no extensive bleeding or problems with breastfeeding. So we were there actually, I guess she was born at 8:30 and we wound up leaving at 2.
During the time that you were there, I imagine that your baby breastfed at least once or twice?
Yes.
And did you, it sounds like you had, and I say this in a very loving way, because sometimes it sounds negative, but you just had all these loving mother hens around you.
Yeah, definitely.
Probably helping you with that first latch and positioning the baby.
So my doula helped with the first latch, and I think that kind of was helpful for the midwives because I had so much support they could focus on other women at the birth center. And strangely enough, so they have 4 birthing suites, and I think that night they had 8 mothers give birth.
Wow.
So I think there were 5 or 6 at the birth center, and so we were kind of moving around. So after my daughter was born, they apologized profusely, but then they moved me into sort of like a private room, but it wasn't a birthing room. And then a new woman was in that birthing room very quickly. And then they had, I think, 2 or 3 transfers that night to the hospital. So they actually called in all of the available midwives and nurses. So everyone was on call and coming in. So it was kind of crazy.
It was a full house.
I know, and I don't think it was a full moon. So it was just really strange. It was right around Thanksgiving.
I kind of like that, though.
Yeah.
I think it's cool. It's like, it was literally like the birthing house.
Exactly. And it was, kind of fun to tell people, well, I was number 2 of the night of 8 or whatever number it was.
That's very cool. So you had mentioned earlier that your baby was tongue-tied.
Yes.
So can you tell me about how you learned that your baby was tongue-tied?
My daughter nursed right after birth while I was still delivering the placenta. And then again, once we were kind of comfortable in a separate area at the birth center. And then we went home and I was nursing her, and it just seemed like she was really kind of not latching very well. And I called the birth center because she wasn't feeding as frequently as they tell you should prompt the baby. And, you know, sometimes they say if the baby is sleeping, wake them up to feed. I mean, it wasn't a question of whether she was sleeping and not nursing. It felt like something was wrong. So we wound up going back into the birth center on, I guess, day 1.5 of when she was born. So she was jaundiced, and they didn't pick that up at birth. But also physiologically, the midwife said to me, you know, she wants your nipple to be about 3 inches long. And so we wound up having to, like, she couldn't latch, and they diagnosed her with a poor latch. And we scheduled at the birth center for them to do a frenulectomy just with scissors at the birth center. And of course, for a new mom, that's very scary. But she nursed right away after that. So for the first, I'd say 3 or 4 weeks, I was pumping milk, and then we were putting it into a syringe, and then she would suck on my pinky while I fed her milk from a syringe.
So I'm gonna interrupt you for a minute. So I want to go back to that first day and a half. Mm-hmm. So you feel like she wasn't nursing effectively,
right?
And you take her in. And the other one thing that I wanted you to describe was exactly what is a tongue tie, and then you talked about her getting snipped.
Yeah.
And then you also talked about your anxiety related to that. So
right.
Can you first tell us what tongue tie is, then talk about the snipping, and then talk about how that made you feel when it was brought up?
So tongue-tied and lip-tied, I think, are the two concerns that are most talked about with nursing at this point. But again, I'm not a nursing specialist. So my daughter had a visible connection of tissue from her tongue down to the bottom of the inside of her mouth. So kind of behind her gums, there was a connecting piece of tissue from her tongue. So it meant that she was prevented from sticking her tongue out enough. So she wasn't latching enough, which requires the tongue to kind of come out of their mouth and kind of act as like the bottom of the latch against your breast. So she wasn't actually getting all of my nipple into her mouth. And so it kind of made sense that the midwives were saying she wants you to have a very long nipple because she wasn't able to get the tissue into the back of her mouth the way she was supposed to.
And take that a little bit further.
Sure.
She's not getting your nipple as far back in her mouth as she needs, and not bringing her tongue well underneath your breast as she is required to do. Mm-hmm. What does that mean with regards to feeding?
It meant that I think I wound up being an overproducer of milk. So I think what was happening is she wasn't getting very much hind milk.
It probably meant that she was not getting enough volume of milk.
Right.
So she was spending her time at the breast, seemingly eating, right, drinking, and yet not getting the volume of milk transfer,
right,
which causes her to go to sleep, not nurse effectively, mm-hmm, usually not gain as well. Now, when moms have an oversupply, sometimes that oversupply compensates for it, but
right,
in the very early days, it could lead to lack of milk transfer, mm-hmm, a huge weight loss, mm-hmm, lack of stool, mm-hmm, and babies getting jaundiced because they're not stooling.
Yes, so all of those things were happening.
Okay.
Yeah, she had jaundice. She wasn't nursing every 2 hours sort of general schedule that was recommended. And it was kind of obvious that something was going wrong with nursing.
So when they told you what procedure they needed to do, how did that affect your mommy heart?
So of course, after you give birth, your hormones are really intense. And so at first I thought, well, I'm failing her with my breastfeeding. There's something wrong with me. And so that was really hard. The other thing that worried me was no one realized that she was jaundiced, and I thought, well, in some way I should have known that, which is, I'm not a medical professional, so I don't know why that was my expectation for myself. And then when they suggested the frenulectomy on site, they explained it as using sterile surgical scissors to cut that tissue that was causing the attached tongue frenulum region. So I felt nervous about that because, anytime you think cutting of tissue, it sounds like it's going to hurt really badly. And the midwives assured me that it won't hurt her. And even if it did, it would be so brief. And then I would be breastfeeding her right away, which would soothe her. Okay. And so all of that did happen. There was very little blood. She actually did not cry very much, but I couldn't watch. So my husband watched. I felt very almost like an instinctual animal at that point where, baby isn't doing well. They want to do something to my baby, and I don't like that.
Right.
But everyone was very positive, and, all of these feelings were kind of from my own brain and my own hormones, I think.
And they're very, I was wanting you to talk about it because they're very, very common feelings, and it's coming from that mother heart place, that place that, we give birth and it's our job to protect our young.
Right.
And so to think about doing anything when people are talking about cutting and tissues and we're worried about the pain and is someone going to do some damage to my baby's mouth and then yet you're being told that, but this will help the breastfeeding. So they're like two sides of your brain almost, push, pull, working with and against each other. So, okay, so you have the procedure done, and tell me how you feel breastfeeding was after that. Because you started to talk about, this is why I brought you back, because you started to talk about several weeks of pumping and supplementing.
Right.
So
I was lucky to have lots of nursing friends at the time, so they gave me some freezer stash milk, and then I was attempting to pump. But, in the early days, you don't get a lot of output. So we were doing the syringe feeding with her because, again, she did not seem to, even after the frenulectomy, have a really deep latch. And luckily, unlike a lot of moms whose children, whose babies do not have a deep latch, it wasn't painful for me. And because I had an oversupply of milk when I did nurse her, there was a lot of milk. However, I think it was more of like a fire hose where she's being doused with milk and she's gulping and lots of air and her latch is not great. So she was physically getting a lot of milk, but it wasn't really ideal.
It wasn't a comfortable feeling.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't uncomfortable for me. I was just worried all the time about her. And she was gaining weight, but it just, we had a lot of trouble of her almost like she wanted to drink out of a straw. And, that doesn't really happen physiologically. And so we actually wound up going to a lactation consultant in our area. And she was really helpful. She actually said to me, she's the one who diagnosed me with oversupply and introduced me to block feeding to correct that. And she observed my daughter. She weighed her, observed our nursing, and suggested any adjustments, and then weighed my daughter again. And because she gained weight in between the basal measurement and the after feeding weight, she said that I would be one of the moms who kind of slipped under the radar for having a child with a tongue tie because she already had a frenulectomy in her early days. I was surprised when the lactation consultant recommended a second one. I'm not really sure whether the first one didn't take. I know there's a lot of times where the tongue tie can grow back, but she wound up having a second frenulectomy at, I think, 3 months. And so that was much more traumatic for me than the newborn frenulectomy. So at the ENT office, I had to hold her in my lap while they used a scalpel to cut the tongue tie. And then after that, I had to do the exercises to make sure that she didn't grow back, and to make sure that, I guess, it took. And so those exercises were kind of traumatic for me because I was concerned that I would be conditioning her to expect pain when she nurses. Retrospectively, I think that was a real concern. And I just am lucky that either I was incorrect or that wasn't my experience.
What was the specific reason you decided to go ahead with the procedure the second time?
I guess I just wanted to really give her the best chance of having a good breastfeeding latch and to get enough nutrition from breastfeeding.
You knew that she could be breastfeeding better, more efficiently, more effectively, more comfortably for her.
Right.
You wanted to make sure she got enough fore milk, hind milk, and that everything with breastfeeding was going as optimally as it could. So you decided to have the second procedure. You did the exercises afterwards, and it sounds like it was successful the second go around.
Yes. Okay. And especially as time went on, when I was able to do the block feeding and control my oversupply, and she and I kind of, she learned how to nurse more properly. She definitely was able to get a deeper latch after the second procedure. After that, it became very easy. I was very confident with breastfeeding her in public. It was not an ordeal. I didn't really have to use a breast pillow. It was much more of the image that I thought I'd have of, I'm out doing stuff and then she wants to breastfeed and there's no drama, much more of this kind of idealistic breastfeeding relationship I expected.
So it takes you at least closer probably to 4 months until you get to that, this is what I expect breastfeeding to be like.
Yes.
And before that, through all your struggles, and with it not coming so easily for her, are there times when you thought, I just don't know if I could keep doing this anymore? Was it ever that bad?
No. And I really was negative, and I don't know whether it was kind of a prejudice against formula feeding. I grew up with kind of a healthy dose of don't trust the formula companies coming from my mom. So I really wasn't interested in using formula, and I knew all of the advantages of breastfeeding. So it was worth it for me to have those 4 months of difficulty. And it really, looking back, we were extremely successful with breastfeeding, even though we had the rocky start. And, I've talked to other mothers who had similar tongue tie situations, and they kind of felt the same way as I did of, I know it's going to get better, but right now it's really hard. So after the 4 months, I think part of it was that she was big enough and strong enough that she was able to handle any oversupply I might have. But secondly, I think I was a lot more relaxed. So it was easier for me, which made it easier for her.
Yeah, they both kind of work together. She's getting older. She's able to cope with a larger flow.
Yes.
At the same time, you're working on decreasing the volume and the flow and getting more comfortable with everything. And you mentioned the word drama before. So I think, that's the word a lot of moms use in the very early days when they're just having such a tough time and their expectation is to, just be able to go out in public and you kind of just latch your baby on and nobody's looking and the baby isn't popping on and off and nobody's crying and there isn't, and then, but you realize, this is my life. There's a lot of drama associated with breastfeeding.
Yeah.
And then at a certain point it just gets nice and easy.
Right.
And what I love is that it just becomes what I call just the rhythm of everyday life, and you're not really thinking about it so much.
And I really felt proud of my ability to nurse in public without being worried about other people's response. And at least in North Carolina, there are a lot of people who have commented to other people, or I've heard lots of stories from friends where strangers would approach them and ask them to cover, or online people would say, well, how would you feel if I took out my body parts and showed them to you? And it was so infuriating and insulting because breastfeeding is not a sexual thing, and it's disgusting for that to be compared, it just is terrible. So I felt really empowered to go out and nurse in public because I felt like I was making it easier for other people to do so. And, that meant a lot to me.
Are you a mom that had your prepared speech if anybody should ever listen to you?
Yes, I was. And, I knew the statutes in the North Carolina law allowing mothers to nurse wherever they're allowed to be. And I remember one time growing up, my mom saw someone smoking in a shopping mall, and she went up to them and read them the riot act. And I was embarrassed at the time, but I was worried that something like that might happen to me, but reverse, where, I'm minding my own business and breastfeeding my daughter, and someone might just come up to me with a nasty attitude. And so I definitely had my prepared speech and, okay, if they say this, what am I going to say? Definitely. I think that having gone through that and seeing new moms, they have kind of done the same thing, especially on some of the forums I'm on where they ask, well, what can I bring with me to, show to the manager at the restaurant if they have a problem with it. I think, fortunately for everyone, especially federally, people are understanding more about breastfeeding being important. Just in the last 5 years even, that definitely has improved, at least in my breastfeeding history. But yeah, I definitely had my stuff together, and it never happened to me. I never had anyone give me dirty look. I actually did a lot of, I never covered, and my style of breastfeeding was, instead of hitching my shirt up and having another shirt underneath, I just put my boob out there. It felt empowering, and it felt rebellious in some ways because so many people were using nursing covers, and, I wasn't going to do that, and I was not going to do that so that other mothers would feel like they could not cover. A funny story, or maybe not funny. So we're Jewish, and so at Passover Seder one year, I think my daughter was 18 months. I actually led the Seder and was nursing her at the same time. And I just felt like, I am woman, hear me roar. I'm a woman leading the Seder, and, sometimes that's only men, and I'm breastfeeding her at the same time. And, it just felt really great.
You are, like you said, I am women, hear me roar. Yes. You are like doing it.
Yeah. And that really made me feel great.
Well, I'm thrilled. That's a fun story.
Yes.
So I hope that helps other people, any of the All About Breastfeeding listeners who are thinking, can I nurse in public? Can I be that mom who is just showing everybody else that this is the norm? And I hope they listen to your story, Shannon, and say, she did and so could I.
Oh, thank you.
I would like for you to talk a little bit about the natural weaning process, or how long your daughter breastfed for, and what that part of your breastfeeding relationship was like.
Sure. I was determined to let her decide when she was done nursing. And so I was totally fine with, the idea of a 3-year-old nursing. I was a little sad when I needed to start a medication that was not compatible with nursing. I felt really guilty because she was 2 years old, and I planned on letting her decide. And, I had to take the initiative to wean her. And I felt really guilty for a long time. I felt like, well, maybe I should have just held out and not taken the medication, and then, she could have breastfed for as long as she wanted to. But I think a lot of times moms need to make that choice of, maybe there is a problem with, a health problem that they need to address, and ignoring it is not the best choice.
Right. So we don't live in a perfect world.
Right. And so, I had to kind of become okay with the idea of my natural weaning was not really practical for us at the time.
Was it tough on your babe?
Surprisingly, no. And I think part of that was because she's always been very oral, and so she was using a pacifier when not nursing, just, for personal comfort. I exchanged out nursing snuggles for just regular snuggles, and so she was still smelling my breasts, but not nursing. And I didn't stop cold turkey. It was kind of a weaning off, and I think it took a week, if I'm remembering correctly. So for me, I think it was probably a lot more emotional than for her. I didn't really want to say no and, make it dramatic, so I would just kind of I guess, redirect her a little bit when she wanted to nurse. And I just kind of reduced the number of nursing times. And the other thing that I did at 2 years old is I transitioned her to a toddler bed in her room. And so we kind of started out with that bed in our room and then eventually moved it down the hall until she was okay with it. So the two of those things together, I was anticipating being very emotional for her, and it was so much more smoother than I expected. It was really weird.
I love it when we have all this anticipation and anxiety about certain things we're doing with our kids, and then they just, blow us a kiss and say, okay, thanks for that, Ma.
Why are you crying?
I know, they're just moving on to the next thing, and we're like, we've lost a whole bunch of sleep over it. So it definitely sounds like exactly like you describe, in that it was heavier for you emotionally than it was for her, and it seemed to be a nice, smooth transition.
Yes.
So thanks for sharing your breastfeeding story. This ends part 1 of the show with Shannon Becker. You will definitely want to listen to part 2, which is being released next week. Shannon gets into her training as an aromatherapist and really helps us to understand essential oils in a way that definitely increased my knowledge base about which oils are safe to use during pregnancy and breastfeeding, as well as for our newborns and our children. See you then.